Testing, testing. There we go. Yeah, sometimes when I stop a stream or something, my sound software decides to take a vacation, even though it's activated. So here we are, everyone. Yes, welcome to a, didn't plan this, but I just wanted to do a quick supplemental on this morning's stream reading the ruling from the Supreme Court on affirmative action. I was curious to find out what the overall, or what some of the reactions would be from the rest of the world, but I didn't want to do that in that stream because that would probably take a while and everything was very fresh at that time. But now a few hours have passed, so I thought I would go over the running blog from CNN covering different reports, different articles, different statements made by colleges and professionals and politicians over what they think about the decision from the Supreme Court earlier today to abolish race-conscious admissions in colleges. Before I get there, who's joining me for this ambush stream? Mike Savage, Raziel, Brittany Holland, Keldrig, Spittlebuggies, Shadowclaw, Unfair Ophelia, Urkole DiStefano, and Plague Trucker Zach. Good afternoon. All right, so I'm not going to take too long with this. I'm just going to go over the little blurbs that CNN has posted in their running blog here, and we'll see if anything exciting jumps out at us. Let's see. This is from 3 hours ago. For true diversity, universities, quote, should eliminate legacy admissions, unquote, advocate against affirmative action says. I agree. I think I've always agreed with that one. An advocate against affirmative action who is on the board of four students. Board of four students for fair admissions, the group that brought the lawsuit against Harvard and University of North Carolina. You mean Harvard and the university? Okay, anyway. Whoever wrote this just really speed run their way through it, says that colleges and universities should eliminate legacy admissions if they want true diversity. Quote, I've always maintained that if colleges and universities truly wanted diversity, they should eliminate legacy admissions. Harvard refused to do that. They will not eliminate legacy admission. Instead, they discriminate against Asians to make room for more Black Americans, unquote, said Kenny Zhu, president of Color Us United, an organization that opposes race-based college admissions, which, it says, disproportionately discriminates against Asian Americans. Well, the Supreme Court found that to be true. So it's not just it says, the court found, but whatever. Quote, if you are an Asian American, you have to score 273 points higher on the SAT to have the same chance of admission as a Black person at Harvard. Is that fair? I understand that people's lives are improved by getting into an Ivy League university, but that opportunity should be made available to people of every race, not just one, unquote, he added. Claiming that a large percentage of Harvard University's Black students are immigrants and come from an upper middle class or higher economic background, he said, quote, at that point, a Black American admitted to Harvard is more likely to have more in common with the standard white upper class applicant than they are to have with a truly poor and disadvantaged person, unquote. Well, CNN, is that true or not? Are you going to fact check him on this? Okay, never mind. More on today's ruling. Yeah, okay, we already talked about that. Let's go up in the timeline here. Harvard and University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill respond to ruling. Harvard University and the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, the universities at the heart of the Supreme Court's ruling that were challenged by students, responded to Thursday's decision by vowing to figure out a way forward. Oh, goody. Harvard, quote, we write today to affirm the fundamental principle that deep and transformative teaching, learning, and research depend upon a community comprising people of many backgrounds, perspectives, and lived experience. Are we going to go back in time now? Are we going to go back in time? I just wonder, sorry for the aside. When I started this channel, some of the earliest videos I did were on DEI presentations and promotional videos from companies. And back then, we're talking 2016, early 2017, the kind of language that these advocates and executives and corporate officers use to describe their DEI programs, or at that time, D&I, diversity and inclusion, they would use the same couched language. They would say everything but race, or if they did, it was always way down at the bottom of the list. So, are they going to continue to use the word diversity? Because here's the thing. This is now the thing. Colleges trying to say they're doing XYZ on the basis of diversity, that is a charged word now after today's ruling. So as we go forward, you and I, into the future, let's see specifically colleges and universities. It's not necessarily the case for other places, but colleges and universities. Let's see how often they employ the word diversity and how often they employ other words to try to get around using that word. Depend upon a community comprising people of many backgrounds, perspectives, and lived experiences. That principle is as true and important today as it was yesterday. So too are the abiding values that have enabled us and every great educational institution to pursue the high calling of educating creative thinkers and bold leaders, of deepening human knowledge, and of promoting progress, justice, and human flourishing, unquote. The Ivy League school said that for almost a decade it had, quote, vigorously defended an admissions system that, as 2 federal courts ruled, fully complied with longstanding precedent, unquote. Yeah, well, precedent isn't law, and a court higher than those just said no. So, in the coming weeks and months, Harvard said it would work to, quote, determine how to preserve, consistent with the court's new precedent, our essential values, unquote. It's easy. It's easy. You just don't use race to evaluate someone's worth. It's a very easy thing. You guys and your defendants, or defendors, I should say, have been saying over and over again, it's just one of many factors. It's just one of many factors that colleges consider. It's just one. So, like, what of all the percentages, you could break down the pie chart, and it's just a tiny, tiny little piece. It really doesn't matter. Well, there you go. Just get rid of it. Change nothing. Change nothing else about what you're doing. You just can't put race on the checklist. It's that simple. It's basically a backspace on your Word document for your forms, and you're done, right? What if it's not that big of a deal? Why is it that big of a deal? UNC, this is the quote from UNC, quote, on behalf of the people of our state, we will work with the administration to ensure that the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill complies fully with today's ruling from the nation's highest court. We intend for America's oldest public university to keep leading, unquote, said David L. Bolick, Jr., the chair of UNC Chapel Hill's Board of Trustees, speaking on behalf of the board. Well, that's a much more diplomatic response and less charged as Harvard. But yeah, I'm going to be looking. I'll be very curious to see over the next weeks and months what Harvard and UNC, and Harvard especially with their stridency on this, what they decide to do or how they decide to respond. Moving upward, Biden administration has been discussing contingency plans on affirmative action. Contingency plans. Okay, what are you planning on doing? You got an executive order to instill racial discrimination into schools? I can't wait to hear this. Members of the Biden administration had already been discussing contingency plans involving executive action. Of course, in the event the Supreme Court ended affirmative action, a person familiar with the plan said. President Joe Biden was briefed by the White House counsel on Thursday after he saw the breaking news reports that the court had gutted the policy. A White House official said, well, this had been coming for months. Anybody with half a brain was pretty sure this was going to be happening for months. Only now, you guys. Anyway, whatever. He then convened a meeting with senior staff who have been closely working on the issue. Okay, it's not immediately clear what steps are currently under discussion, and officials have been clear that no step Biden could take would reverse the court's ruling. Right. So what is he planning on doing? The court locked off every argument under the sun to justify using race in college admissions and cited it as inherently unconstitutional. How is he going to contingency his way around that, I wonder? Still, officials inside the administration have been exploring what options exist, including through the Department of Education and by executive action. Okay, I'm morbidly curious to know what they plan on doing or what they come up with. Biden last spoke at length about affirmative action at a news conference last November, holding out hope that the Supreme Court would uphold it. He is scheduled to deliver remarks from the White House's Roosevelt Room any minute. I think we have those upwards in the blog here. The White House has previously declined to say what steps Biden might take should affirmative action be struck down. Okay, quote, the president supports making higher education accessible to all Americans, unquote, unless you don't pass the racial test. Right? Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said earlier this year, quote, as the Department of Justice argued in court, it is important that our colleagues in universities produce graduates who are from all segments of society, who are prepared to succeed and lead an increasingly diverse nation, unquote. Well, I'm curious to see what you do about it. Let's see. We got statements from different politicians. Whatever. Let's see. Biden delivers remarks after affirmative action ruling. Let's get the remarks. Let's see. Okay. Let's see. Biden, Supreme Court, quote, walked away from decades of precedent, unquote, in affirmative action decision. Yes, they walked away from decades of unofficial guidance and found it unconstitutional. President Joe Biden said the Supreme Court has reserved precedent in its decision to gut affirmative action in college admissions. As reserved precedent. The court has once again walked away from decades of precedent, Biden said in remarks. You mean reversed precedent? It says reserved precedent. CNN, never change. The court has once again walked away from decades of precedent, Biden said in remarks at the White House. Biden said he strongly, unquote, disagrees with the court's decision and its impacts. Quote, this is not a normal court, Biden said after his remarks when asked by CNN's Arlette Saenz whether he believes it was a rogue court. Is this the same rogue court that affirmed that Native American children should not be adopted out to white families if there are members of their tribe that can take them in? Okay. Let's see. Biden again. Colleges are stronger when they're racially diverse. Okay, Joe, on what metric? What is the proper balance of races at a college to, reach the maximum strength? Well, but you wouldn't be suggesting racial quotas, would you? President Joe Biden criticized the Supreme Court ruling that struck down affirmative action in college admissions and said the decision goes against U.S. values. Quote, I believe our colleges are stronger when they're racially diverse. Our nation is stronger, but because we are tapping into the full range of talent in the nation, unquote, he said Thursday. Now, Joe, when you take something that is non-determinative of merit and put it above merit, you are not tapping into the full range of talent. That's the point, Joe. That was the point of the Civil Rights Act. Quote, I also believe that while talent, creativity, and hard work are everywhere across this country, not equal opportunity, it is not everywhere across this country. We cannot let the decision be the last word, unquote, he added. All right, Joe, what are you going to do? I'm curious to see what you decide to do and then what the challenge is against it. More. Let's see. Anything else? Quote, America is an idea unique in the world, an idea of hope and opportunity, of possibilities, of giving everyone a fair shot. Everyone a fair shot, Joe? Okay, on what basis? Of leaving no one behind. We've never fully lived up to it, but we have never walked away from it either, he added. We will not walk away from it now, unquote. What are you going to do? What are you going to do, Joe? The president then laid out a new path forward, one that he said was consistent with the nation's values, but also consistent with the court's ruling. All right. Biden said schools should not abandon their commitment to creating diverse student bodies, continuing to take into account, quote, the adversity a student has overcome when selecting among qualified applicants. Joe, did you read the decision? I doubt it. Justice Roberts, at least writing in the majority, expressly addressed that notion that one's experience as a result of their race in life, if they had been a victim of discrimination, if their race had demonstrably played a role in some challenge or in some element of their backstory in applying to college, that was fine. But race unto itself was unconstitutional as a metric of worth. You're not even paying attention to what the court said. I'm not surprised, but there you go, Joe. The president emphasized that, as they did before today's ruling, schools should first ensure that students have the requisite grades and test scores to qualify. And then their background should be considered, he said. Define background, Joe. Biden said the kinds of adversity worth considering could include things like whether the student lacks financial means or whether they're first in their family to attend college. I agree, Joe. What does that have to do with race? What has that ever had to do with race? That kind of student, quote, has demonstrated more grit, more determination, should be a factor that colleges should take into account in admissions, Biden said. Nothing prevented them from doing that previously, Joe. Nothing. Let me spell it out for you. Nothing. Nothing. You're not saying anything the court was saying it couldn't do. You're not saying anything that schools haven't had the option to do since the beginning. It's about skin color, Joe. Quote, it also means examining where the student grew up, has nothing to do with race, and went to high school, has nothing to do with race. It means understanding the particular hardships that each individual student has faced in life, including racial discrimination, the president said. Joe, did you read the decision, Joe? Did you read the process by which the colleges assess an applicant, Joe? The court did not say you can't do that. The court said nothing about that except to say that that is the exception to the whole idea. If you can articulate in your student application a life experience that was of hardship as a direct result of your race, that I was discriminated against in this instance by this person or under this circumstance because of my skin color and for no other reason, and yada, 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 there's my story. That's fine, Joe. They said it in the decision. What do colleges do now? They make race a checkbox, Joe. It has nothing to do with their background, their personal story, or whatever else. Race counts as a point in your favor or disfavor, regardless of your personal history, Joe. Nothing you've said here, the court outlawed. Everything you've listed here is perfectly acceptable under the decision today, Joe. This is why it helps to read the things you are opposing first, to try to understand them, Joe. Moments after Biden's remarks, the White House unveiled a series of executive actions meant to continue boosting diversity on college campuses, including providing guidance to schools on admissions practices. So you're going to help schools try to do an end run around the Constitution and the Supreme Court. I can't wait for this. Boy, you're going to see a cavalcade of legal challenges to these things. Boy, howdy. Thank you, Maddie's House of Geek. Are we really surprised at this point that Joe is for the soft bigotry of low expectations? That's all affirmative action is. No, I'm not. I'm not. But here's something else. And I know this is too much to ask for. I would at least hope that the leader of our country, the executive, would have actually read the Supreme Court ruling and have some working understanding of it before making statements that are 100% nonsensical. Nonsensical. That's all I would hope. I know. It's a lot to ask for. Thank you, Maddie, so much. It's a lot to ask for. Let's see. Biden said that he would direct the Department of Education, quote, to analyze what practices help build a more inclusive and diverse student body and what practices hold that back. Practices like legacy admissions and other systems that expand privilege instead of opportunity, unquote. Get rid of legacy admissions. Just get rid of them. Legacy admissions are, in all intents and purposes, the same mechanism as race. It says nothing about your personal merit. It just says something about some non-determinative factor of you. Your grandpa used to go to this college. Whoop-de-skip. Who cares? Just like race, who cares? That's where we're supposed to be. Who cares? He added, quote, we can't go backwards. Okay, Joe, then abide by the court. Abide by the idea of putting aside race as a consideration of merit, Joe. Quote, we can't go backwards. I know today's court decision is a severe disappointment to so many people, including me, but we cannot let the decision be a permanent setback for the country. We need to keep an open door of opportunities, unquote. Joe, did you read the decision, Joe? Did you read all of the legal precedent around the idea of doing away with race assessment in this society that the court quoted? Did you see that even under the most ideal situation argued by those defending affirmative action, this whole thing was going to go away in 4 years anyway? 25 years from Grutter, whatever it was, right? 25 years on from the Grutter decision was what they assessed at the time. So what was going to happen in 2028, Joe? What's different about 2028 as it is now? Nothing. The argument would be the same in 2028 as it is now, and it's nothing, and it's baseless, and it's gone. Let's see. Moving upwards in the chain. Analyst, impact of affirmative action ruling likely to vary across states and include litigation. You're not just whistling Dixie. The Supreme Court ruling says colleges and universities cannot rely on race in admissions is expected to lead to a range of responses, plural, maybe? Am I the only English major here at a news site? Okay, range of response from higher education, according to Steve Vladeck, CNN Supreme Court analyst and professor at the University of Texas School of Law. It will have two distinct sets of effects, depending on the state where the school is located. Number one, quote, in those states that have already banned racial preferences and gone after diversity statements and other softer uses of race in admissions, the decision is going to make it virtually impossible for colleges and universities to take race into account in any specific admissions decision, unquote, he said. Good. Number two, but in states that continue to permit colleges and universities to take race into account, we'll surely see efforts to encourage the kinds of uses the majority does not expressly disavow, whether in diversity statements or elsewhere, unquote, he added. And in those more liberal states, Vladeck said, there will likely be, quote, litigation challenging those efforts as being inconsistent with the spirit, if not the letter, of today's decision, unquote. Yes, just like in California, has had a ban on affirmative action since 1996, they will find any way they possibly can to get around actually using the word or the mechanism of race in their policies, and yet they will still attribute certain attributes to race in trying to pump up their numbers, as in economic status, geography, and so on. They can't say, well, we're going to recruit as many X racial demographic as we can. They will say, well, we try to diversify our student body by recruiting from low income populations or communities of this geographic location. We're not saying that you're necessarily associating race with poverty or race with this. We're just saying that there's I know they'll do everything that they can to get around it and being as racist as possible without actually saying it, just like California. Thank you, Shadow Call. Mind you, Joe is just a puppet reacting to a little info. Well, again, this is my sort of idealistic wish for the executive that whoever it is would at least have the wherewithal and the time and the care to know something about what they're talking about, or at least have somebody who knows what they're talking about advise them in as objective a way as possible before they open their mouths. That's all. Let's see. Okay, now this is the one that I wanted to get to. This is the one I wanted to get to because this is hilarious. Clarence Thomas, and actually, you know what? There's a story. There's an explicit story on this. Let me find that real quick. I think I tweeted that out earlier. I'd rather read that because that was a little bit more lengthy. There it is. 1 second here. Sorry, guys. Let me just do this real quick. Let me do this. All right. Is it coming up? It's coming up. All right. This is something else. Justices Clarence Thomas and Ketanji Brown Jackson criticize each other in unusually sharp language in affirmative action case. The Supreme Court's landmark ruling Thursday on affirmative action pitted its two black justices against each other, with the ideologically opposed jurists employing unusually sharp language, attacking each other by name. The majority opinion, authored by Chief Justice John Roberts, said colleges and universities can no longer take race into consideration as a specific basis for granting admission, saying programs at Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Equal Protection Clause because they failed to offer, quote, measurable, unquote, objectives to justify the use of race. Well, they said more than that, Devin Cole, if you read the whole decision. There was more arguments against its use on the basis of constitutional law. But okay, but that's one of them. That's a really good one. Justice Clarence Thomas and the court's other four conservatives joined Roberts' opinion. But Thomas, who in 1991 became the second black person to ascend to the nation's highest court, issued a lengthy concurrence that attacked such admissions programs and tore into arguments posited by liberal Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, the first black woman to join the court, who penned her own fiery dissent in the case. Thomas has previously acknowledged that he made it to Yale Law School because of affirmative action, but he has long criticized such policies. He spoke in personal terms in his concurrence that he put forth his argument against the use of the policies, which he described as rudderless, race-based preferences designed to ensure a particular racial mix in their entering classes, unquote. Quote, even in the segregated South where I grew up, individuals were not the sum of their skin color, unquote, Thomas wrote. Quote, while I am painfully aware of the social and economic ravages which have befallen my race, and this ad that popped up in front of me, befallen my race and all who suffer discrimination, he added, quote, I hold out enduring hope that this country will live up to its principles, so clearly enunciated in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States, that all men are created equal, are equal citizens, and must be treated equally before the law, unquote. As he read his concurrence from the bench on Thursday, Jackson, who joined the court last year, stared blankly ahead. Though Justice Sonia Sotomayor read her dissent from the bench, Jackson did not read her own dissent, in which she went after Thomas's concurrence and accused the majority of having a, quote, let them eat cake obliviousness, unquote, in how the ruling announced, quote, colorblindness for all by legal fiat, unquote. I just love how someone at the heights of the Supreme Court of the United States still thinks that the principle of colorblindness is somehow something we should avoid. You want to talk about something that's worrying to me. There you go. A footnote near the end of Jackson's dissent went after the concurrence by Thomas, with the liberal justice accusing her colleague of demonstrating, quote, an obsession with race consciousness that far outstrips my or UNC's holistic understanding that race can be a factor that affects applicants' unique life experiences, unquote. Justice Jackson, did you read the opinion? Did you read the opinion that explicitly says a student is not disallowed and a college is not disallowed from considering one's story of hardship based on racial discrimination in their life? Did you read the decision yourself? It was explicitly stated. Lordy, quote, Justice Thomas ignites too many more straw men to list or fully extinguish here, Jackson wrote. Why? Go ahead. You're a Supreme Court justice. You have all the paper and ink afforded to you under this country's rules of law. Tell us all of them. Go ahead. Why wouldn't you? For the record, for posterity's sake, go ahead. Oh, there's so many straw men, I just don't have the time. Give me a break. Come on. And I don't mean this in some sort of like ideologically opposed way. I mean, seriously, this is something that is important. These arguments are going to stand the test of time, or they are not. If you have a dissent on the opinion, put out your full dissent. It needs to be there to be considered by future courts and future legal challenges. Why would you? Okay, anyway. This is part of the process, okay? The opinion in the majority and the dissent by the minority, those are important parts of the process. You don't... When it comes to things like this, I want as complete and full-throated a declaration of belief and declaration of interpretation from both sides of the aisle, regardless of whether or not I agree with the decision that made it in the majority. I want everybody to have their full say. Saying, oh, there's too much to list, I'm not even going to bother. That is so childish. Quote, the takeaway is that those who demand that no one think about race, a classic pink elephant paradox, refuse to see, much less solve for, the elephant in the room. The race-linked disparities that continue to impede achievement of our great nation's full potential, unquote. In her broader dissent, Jackson said that the argument made by the challengers that affirmative action programs are unfair, quote, blinks both history and reality in ways too numerous to count, unquote. Go ahead. Take the time. List them all. That is so frustrating. I want a full opposition. I want a full and complete opposition, point by point. I don't assume that everything the court says in the majority is perfect. And I don't assume that everything that's said in the court, dissent or otherwise, is going to work 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line. Why act like this? Too numerous to count. Oh, there's too many to fully extinguish here. No one's stopping you from saying your full piece, and I want you to say your full piece. Why? It doesn't matter whether it's a Supreme Court justice or anybody else. When someone says something like that, in the absence of any other information, I can only assume they don't actually have anything. They're just sour grapes. Quote, but the response is simple. Our country has never been colorblind, unquote, Jackson said. Well, let's work towards that, shall we? And so the answer to your concern is to have race count in favor or disfavor of someone in colleges. Why should we not work towards that goal? Work towards that principle? Parenthetical, while Jackson recused herself from the Harvard case, she did hear the UNC case, and her dissent was focused on the latter. Thomas then explicitly attacks Jackson's opinion. Quote, as she sees things, we are all inexorably trapped in a fundamentally racist society, with the original sin of slavery and the historical subjugation of Black Americans still determining our lives today, unquote, Thomas wrote. Quote, worse still, Justice Jackson uses her broad observations about statistical relationships between race and select measures of health, wealth, and well-being to label all Blacks as victims, unquote. Yes. A disparity does not inherently indicate an inequity. Thank you, Justice Thomas, quote, unquote. Thomas wrote at another point in his concurrence, quote, her desire to do so is unfathomable to me, unquote. Oh, man, today feels good. I tell you what. And I saw this, and this is an interesting point. A 15-cent law degree. Thomas, one of the court's most conservative members, has long been known for his distaste for affirmative action policies. He has been open about the fact that he made it to Yale because of affirmative action, but says the stigma of preferential treatment made it difficult for him to find a job after college. In his memoir, My Grandfather's Son, Thomas says he felt, quote, tricked, unquote, by paternalistic whites at Yale who recruited Black students. Quote, after graduating from Yale, I met a Black alumnus at the University of Michigan Law School who told me that he'd made a point of not mentioning his race on his application. I wished with all my heart that I had done the same, unquote, he wrote. Quote, I learned the hard way that a law degree from Yale meant one thing for white graduates and another for Blacks, no matter how much anyone denied it, unquote, Thomas wrote. Quote, as a symbol of my disillusionment, I peeled a 15-cent price sticker off a package of cigars and stuck it on the frame of my law degree to remind myself of the mistake I'd made by going to Yale, unquote. He dissented in the 2003 case Grutter v. Bullinger, which allowed for the limited use of race in college admissions. Quote, I believe Blacks can achieve in every avenue of American life without the meddling of university administrators, unquote, he wrote in his dissent. I tell you what, that is just something else. That is just something else. Yeah, so there you go, guys. Just wanted to do that real quick. I'm going to go through some comments from you guys. Anything I don't get to in the chat, please, by all means, leave a comment down below after the video is posted. Let's see. Who else we got here? Plague Trucker Zach. They can never list the things, only say there are too many. Yeah, there are too many. There are too many examples to count. There are so many studies that show this. Like, you know, for someone just doing some kind of presentation or some kind of PowerPoint or whatever, yeah, there's a little leeway there for time constraints and everything. But if you're a Supreme Court justice, by all means, go to town, write out everything, use all the ink to put it out there for conversation's sake and for reference in the future. This article just brought up a line or two from a dissent Thomas wrote 20 years ago. And it's relevant to the events of today. It was the dissent back then. It's relevant now. If you've got an argument against the majority's opinion, state it in full. Don't do this, I'm going to take my ball and go home nonsense. Come on. That was so, of all the things, you know, regardless of whether or not I agree with Justice Jackson's dissent or overall opinion of affirmative action, I want her or any other justice on the court to go all out in every case, not just this one, in every case on their dissent, so that at some point down the line, maybe another court or another case could make use of that in a way that furthers justice in this country and doesn't curtail it. Of everything that I've read so far, that's probably the most infuriating to me. I just, of all the people that should just lay it all out there, one of our Supreme Court justices just kind of says, there's too many to name. Anyway, your boy Pat, that's what angers me. They act like people like me don't exist, and that's racist. Either we are going to reach a point in this country where we say, we are going to assess each other on our merits, or we're not. Affirmative action holds to, here's the thing. DEI is the direct result of affirmative action allowing people to think that it's okay to assess people on the basis of race. As long as you can make an argument that satisfies the precedent of affirmative action, that diversity is the end-all be-all, that everybody benefits from this, that, or the other, it'll never go away. We've seen this the entire, at least as long as my channel, because I'll be honest, until I started my channel and everything, I wasn't paying attention to this stuff, right? But the poison seed that has allowed people to justify in their minds and their policies, both in schools and most decidedly outside of schools, has continued to push this narrative. And this narrative is poison. Racial identitarianism, racial discrimination, however you put it, however you try to soften it, it's poison. And affirmative action has given people, if not legal cover for employing these policies and initiatives, it's given them ideological justification and fuel to keep going with this stuff. And yeah, today's decision doesn't cure the problem. No. It's just the beginning, but it certainly draws a line where everything that happens forward from this point will have to be tested against the Constitution and the decision today. And that's a good thing. Now, what comes out of that, state by state, institution by institution, we shall see in the coming months and years. But this needed to happen. This is like the last bastion of benevolent racism as far as the law and precedent was concerned. And I'm very happy to see it go. This is Kyle. Those are the same people who tell you to do your homework and then get mad when you come back with different facts than them. Peter, too many to count, so there's no need to give even one. Exactly. Isn't that always the case? You know, I mean, what do I always ask when I do these panel discussions and things, and people talk about how this is great and that's great and everything else? I'm like, okay, give me a success story. Just give me one example. How many streams have I done where we've listened to someone who claims to be an expert or comports themselves as some kind of authority on something, and they're talking about in these high-minded, extolling terms about this, that, whatever it is, whether it's feminism, whether it's restorative justice, whether it's affirmative action, whether it's DEI, and 9 times out of 10, I'm sitting there waiting like, give me a success story. Give me an active example. You know, whether it proves your point or not, I just want to hear that you have something to offer. It seems like they can never quite come up with something that completely exonerates them of their nonsense. Let's see, Deco, and I'm so glad I chose my university instead of the leftist art university I wanted to go to. You know, the university I went to, all of this stuff, I have no idea. I honestly have no idea if affirmative action or anything derivative of it was part of my university's makeup at the time that I went. Because a lot of this stuff, a lot of the most extreme stuff didn't start befalling universities until, I want to say, about 10 years after the fact. So I may have dodged a proverbial bullet. But thank you, Frosted Glass. Jackson wouldn't be a justice without color blindness. But apparently she wants it for everybody else. All right? I don't know. You see, and here's the thing, given the... you know, I try not to get too, partisanly political on this, but with the liberal partisan bias, I just combine partisan and liberal particle. With the partisan liberal bias on this subject, is her nomination not now suspect? Would she have been fine, benefiting from affirmative action in people's thoughts and minds in her nomination and selection? I guess not. I guess she'd be fine with it. Right? Because what else is she arguing for? She's arguing for being elevated not wholly on your merits. It's ridiculous. Thank you, John Miller. Jackson just mad because she was an AA hire. Apparently, she's fine with that idea, right? If she's so against Thomas's experience as an example in the majority, if she's arguing for affirmative action, she must be fine with the idea of people being suspicious of her placement. I guess. I'm not quite sure what else to think about that one, right? Nobody, not me. The dissent is an important part of the legal context. It will be referenced in the future. A well-written dissent is a framework for future revision. Exactly. Exactly. Just like this article quoted Thomas, just like anybody who was in the dissent of any of the rulings that propped up separate but equal in the past, we're setting the stage for the future. That's why you need a full-throated dissent, not a tantrum or what sounds like a tantrum. I don't want a tantrum. I want my Supreme Court justices to argue to the fullest extent that they are able what they think and how they interpret the law, whether they're in the majority or the dissent. It's all important. It's all part of the process. Just like in any legal case, I want the prosecution and the defense to do everything they can within the boundaries of the law to work their case. You know, we don't have a perfect system, but I tell you what, it becomes more imperfect when the people involved in it don't do their jobs to the fullest extent of their responsibilities. But with that, everybody, I'm going to call it here. I didn't mean to really go this long, but I went as long as I went. And for the second time today, I'll remind that tonight at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern will be an episode of TED Excellence where I'll take a look at an argument for the importance of DEI work in communities and schools. This argument comes from about a year ago, year and a half, something like that. So it's not the most fresh TEDx, but on the occasion of today's decision, even though I didn't know what it would be until I read it this morning, I decided it might be interesting, depending on how the decision went today, to put today's revelations up against an argument for DEI that is relatively fresh and see how it would hold up after today if it were tried to be employed or affected in a business and especially in a school. Mr. Tickle Trunk, thank you so much for the, oh, whoops, I clicked on the wrong thing, but I will also say Shadowclaw, Dogcat Fox, yes. Mr. Tickle Trunk, thank you so much for the happy, smiley, lovely, dancing Dogcat Fox. Oh, Dogcat Fox.
Well.
Oh, that was a tailed feature, Dogcat Fox of the highest order. But yeah, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern tonight, guys, on this channel, TED Excellence, where I'll take a look at a DEI argument and set it up against what we read today from the decision from the Supreme Court on affirmative action. But with that, everybody, thank you guys so much for joining me for this little ambush stream. Moderators, thank you for keeping an eye on things. Even though everyone here is so well behaved, you have very little to do. Everybody who donated, thank you so much for your generosity. I really do appreciate it. Hope you all have a good rest of your day. Good Friday ahead of you. Good 4th of July weekend. If you have the 4-day, great. If you have the 2 and then off and then 1, either way, enjoy yourselves and play it safe, especially with those fireworks. I hope you're all safe and well. If you are not well, please get well soon. And I'll see you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.